Hey, it's Aaron, the Metal Theologian. Alright, so I am going to do a video about 5 jazz records that I think would be good ones for someone who's brand new to jazz, but sort of wants to figure out what the hype is about, and is willing to make a little bit of effort to actually sit and listen to these records. Okay, so this is sort of inspired by discussion I was having in a video by High Rant District, and you should be subscribed to him if you're not. High Rant District. I'll try to remember to link to him below. But he did a video not too long ago where he was comparing a Lee Morgan record to, I don't know, something newer, and talking about, you know, which one sort of sounded more bold and more energetic. And the Lee Morgan record specifically is called Search for the New Land, and he was saying, yeah, it doesn't really sound like you're searching for all that much here. And he is kind of right, because it's kind of an ordinary hard bop record. And there's some kind of interesting stuff. You know, you could make an argument that in the context of its time, it was more sort of, you know, searching than it sounds today. But I really believe that a record has to stand on its own merits when you're listening to it. And I think that if you're talking about a record and you have to resort to, well, when this came out, it really blew everybody's mind, then the record probably sucks. You know, it's like, those are great stories. You know, I love hearing about, like, the riots when The Rite of Spring came out, but The Rite of Spring doesn't sound as, you know, freaky today as it would have, you know, when it came out. So now I'm only going to listen to The Rite of Spring if I actually enjoy it, which I do, but I'm not here to talk about Stravinsky. So anyway, so I really spent some time thinking about this, and what I was looking for is a set of records. There's some discussion about how to get into jazz, okay? If you're going to get into jazz, you don't know anything about it, and there seemed to be sort of a semi-consensus that it's a good idea to start at the beginning and sort of, like, learn the history of it. And aside from the fact that, you know, some of these sources, like the Ken Burns documentary, are kind of sketchy as far as where they put their emphasis and, you know, what they do and don't talk about. You can literally spend you can spend your time going through decades worth of just shit that isn't even, like, interesting. I mean, I'm not interested in, like, big band shit. I mean, some of it's nice, but it's not my thing. I don't really give a crap about bebop. I do like hard bop, but hard bop, and this is why I think the Lee Morgan record fell flat for the High Rant District dude, is that hard bop has been so played to death, you know. It was kind of the next step after bebop at the time, you know what I mean? It was sort of a hardening of the sound, sort of more of a soul element than, like, more of the sort of heady, you know, precision of the original bebop stuff that, like, you know, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie were playing. But now it's in car commercials, and now it's become so mainstream to the point where if you just go up to someone on the street and say, hey, what do you think of when you think of jazz? What they're going to say is probably going to be a hard bop record, and the sound that's going to come to their mind is probably going to be a hard bop sound. So in picking these records, I tried to stay away from anything obvious. I tried to pick records that were challenging, but not so challenging that, like, that they would just rip your face off. You know, there's no Peter Brutzmann in here. There's no Albert Eiler. There's no later Coltrane, you know what I mean? There's stuff, the idea with these records that you sit down, you listen to them, and you learn how to listen for the different kinds of melodies and start to get how the melodies unfold when you're listening to jazz. Because that's how I got into it. And I'll tell you the first record that really did that for me, which there was no way I could leave that list. As soon as I wet my whistle with this stuff called Almdudler. It's Austrian, apparently, and it actually says it's like it says from natural herbs from the Alps. So yeah, on the back of this Alpine.
Yeah, I could have sworn we did one. But I could have sworn we did that one.
No, not this one. It's been sitting in the back of the fridge. We chilled it. We just didn't do it. Yeah.
Which is the one we did a couple videos ago? That was also in a can. And wasn't the same kind of.
I don't remember.
I think we've done that, and we might have got 2.
It's really something. It starts out like a ginger ale. Like when it's entering your mouth, have a sip. As soon as you taste it, you'll know we haven't done it before. when it goes into your mouth, it comes on like a ginger ale. You know, it almost feels like a Verner's or something like that, like just sort of an ordinary ginger ale, except really light. But then, like, the sort of herbal flavor starts to kind of unfold in your mouth. It's really something. And you know, I want to say like, you know, green or something like that, some sort of adjective, but that's not really accurate. It's more like, here, take a sip, or else give it to me.
I was just reading the thing. It's
Yeah,
funny. It says keep cool and dry for storing, so you need to keep the soda dry.
The carbonation is like, it's not all that sweet. At the very, very finish, it almost has a hint of bitterness.
It smells like ginger ale.
Yeah, try it. Isn't it weird? You think it's ginger ale, but then it's not. It's totally not ginger ale. All right.
It tastes like if you mixed ginger ale with grass clippings.
Except it doesn't taste like grass clippings. It tastes like
just something
it's
like
something
earthy.
herbal that I can't put my finger in. It's more earthy than herbal. Yeah, you're right. But it's not like dirty like ginseng. You know what I mean? It's kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Anyway. By the way, we're listening to Sonny Rollins right now. If you watched my videos before, you're probably not surprised. And this was a contender. But I actually decided this one was a little bit too difficult. But I'm leaving it in the background, so if you disagree with me, I highly recommend this record. This might be my favorite Sonny Rollins record if I had to pick one. It's called Cosmic Tones for Mental Therapy. So the record that made me realize that I like jazz was this record, Blues and Roots by Charlie Mingus. He wasn't called Charlie on very many of his albums. It was usually Charles or just Mingus. This record has a relatively large band, okay? 2 alto saxes, obviously Charles Mingus on bass, okay? 2 alto saxes, tenor sax, baritone sax, 2 trombones, piano, and drums, okay? The first tune on this Wednesday night prayer meeting, you can hear it. When I bought this record, I brought it home, and I lay down on the couch. I don't remember if the lights were on or off, but I closed my eyes and I listened to this record. And it was just one of the most alive things that I've ever heard, with all these different melodies going on at the same time. And it sounds like, you know, one of the things that people like to talk about is the idea of group improvisation when they talk about jazz history. And you can hear that that's going on here, but it still coheres as a unit, you know what I mean? It's not like everyone's off playing their own thing, like the way, free jazz by Ornette Coleman can kind of sound, you know. This thing has a structure, and it has a focus, and it has a purpose, and it has an intensity, and it's really listenable in spite of the fact there's a lot of that stuff going on. Another great example is Monin, which has like a really basic vamp, and the baritone sax is like sort of its bass line. But the playing over it is on top of it. So it draws you in with that, right? But then, like, there's all this stuff going on. You can hear the melodies, and yeah, it's just awesome. I mean, you know, you can kind of hear the roots in the blues a little bit. But to call this a blues record is really kind of nuts, frankly. Okay, so that's one, and these aren't in any particular order. Well, they're sort of a little bit in order. Okay, this is the second one. This is the most hard bop-ish of the lot, okay? It's even on Blue Note. But this is a Point of Departure by Andrew Hill. There were a couple guys in the early 60s who were on Blue Note, and on, you know, the Blue Note, in the Blue Note roster, so you see Andrew Hill as a sideman, like maybe on a Jackie McLean album or something like that. But, a couple of these guys started really reaching out. You could tell by listening to their records that they had listened to free jazz. They weren't going to go down the route of free jazz the way like Coltrane did, but you know, Albert Ayler had made an impression on them, and you know, Pharoah Sanders and Ornette Coleman, probably even more than those two. You hear that on the early 60s records, early to mid 60s records by Jackie McLean. You hear it on Gratian Moncourt's records, and you really hear it on Andrew Hill's records. And I really think this one is probably the most fully realized in that style. It's kind of a standard hard bop band, although it's a relatively large one, because yeah, it's a 6-piece. Okay, so Kenny Dorham on trumpet, Eric Dolphy, who is a gem anyway, an alto sax, flute and bass clarinet. I'm a sucker for anything with bass clarinet. Joe Henderson on sax, Andrew Hill on piano, Richard Davis on bass, and then Anthony Williams on drums. Tony Williams, who was later with Miles Davis, was probably 16 or 17 when this got cut. Anyway, this one kind of starts with a hard bop sort of feel to it, but it reaches and does that sort of searching. I'll bet that this record kind of sounds like what High Rant District was hoping that Lee Morgan record was going to sound like, but frankly doesn't sound like. This one is really within sort of it's just a step beyond hard bop. It's sort of like dipping a toe out into the waters outside, like starting to look for the next thing. It takes its hard bop sort of foundation for granted almost, though, and is pushing past that. And in the process, really overshadowing hard bop. I don't know, I kind of like hard bop less and less with time. I mean, I still love it. I can listen to Dexter Gordon, and I can listen to Art Blakey, and I love that shit. I can listen to Lee Morgan. I did listen to that Lee Morgan record after I watched that video. But this is the stuff where you really sort of start to hear the movement away from it and sort of the development. And again, you hear a lot of different melodies. You can sit back, but its foundation is approachable. Okay, it's a record that'll challenge you, but it's not a record that'll just freak you out. It's definitely not a record where you're going to go, oh, I'm going to hear this in the fucking, I don't know, commercial for, I don't know, I already said cars. I'm trying to think of something else. Insurance, I don't know.
Car commercials are really the worst offender when it comes to that.
Yeah, the car commercials are the worst because they're appealing to a lifestyle. They're trying to make you feel sophisticated because you like jazz. And in fact, there's one reason why I sort of cringe when people say that they like jazz, unless I find out they're actually into it, is because there's so many pretentious people out there, you know. And it's music to be enjoyed. It's not like something you go, oh, I like jazz because I'm smart. It's like, if you're not going to enjoy it, then just fucking be honest and listen to Foghat or something. It's all good. You know? Okay, I picked this one. This is Way Out West by Sonny Rollins. He has a couple other records that are probably held in higher regard than this, like Volume 2 on Blue Note, or Saxophone Colossus. But for my money, this one, which is sort of a pickup session when he was on the West Coast at one point, is probably the best one. He was playing these old, like, country and western songs, like I'm an Old Cowhand, you know, Wagon Wheels, and these really kind of corny things, although there are a couple originals on here. And he's playing them with a 3-piece, okay? So it's just Sonny Rollins on tenor sax, and then you have a bass, and you have a drummer. It's actually Shelly Manne on drums. So, who's a fucking hell of a drummer. So, there's no, you know, usually on jazz records, especially around this time, you'd have sort of, for your chord structure, to sort of bind it together as the glue, you'd have, you'd have a piano, and if you didn't have a piano, then you'd have vibes or a guitar or something like that. This just completely throws that out the window and relies solely on this really spare arrangement where you really only have 2 people playing a defined pitch at a time on the sax and on the bass, you know? Once again, I think it's a great record for just listening to the melodies, listening to them unfold, and listening to the improvisation, and starting to, understand how these things are put together, you know? It's a record that you can listen to where there isn't so much going on that distracts you. There are just a couple specific things to focus in on. And then maybe you can come back later on and listen to, like, Duke Ellington thing and actually hear everything going on in the orchestra, you know? Although I'm not a Duke Ellington fan, so. Did this end? Yeah, I'm talking for longer than I realized.
14 minutes in.
So that kind of theme as far as things that are a little bit spare and kind of have a relatively simple foundation upon which the music is built. That's kind of the theme of the next couple records, too. Come on, fucking piece of shit. There we go. So, the next one I picked, and this was hard.
Remind me next time I make a video to turn off auto exposure. It's kind of messing up the brightness.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. Actually, I think the fan is messing up the brightness, too.
Oh, yeah, it's probably that.
I always forget to turn off the ceiling fan. Oh, well, fuck it, it's comfortable. All right, this was really close, okay? Ornette Coleman had to go in there because this quartet was revolutionary. This is the classic quartet right here with Ornette on alto sax, on his plastic alto sax, obviously. Don Cherry on pocket trumpet, Charlie Hayden on bass, then Ed Blackwell on drums. It was really, I was really on the fence up until about 10 minutes before I made this video between this one and The Shape of Jazz to Come, because this one's kind of more highly regarded. This is the one that really broke the new ground when it came out in '59 and kind of blew everyone's mind. The thing is, I think that this one is more fully developed from the standpoint of the different melodies happening, okay? There are a lot of parts on The Shape of Jazz to Come where you have, again, there's no chord player, so there's no guitar or piano or something like that, right? It's two horns and the bass and drums. And you hear a lot of sort of jagged unisons. I mean, they're not really unisons, but they're sort of close on this one with the trumpet and the sax. And with this one, it really kind of feels a little more than on that one, like they all found their own spaces and their own roles in the quartet. And so that's why I would probably recommend this one. It was close though, man, because this is a great record, and I don't know that there's ever been a better performance on any jazz record than Lonely Woman. Yeah, I mean, so good. So anyway, though, it's a record to listen to how the pieces fit together, and how they don't fit together, and how they branch off from each other and come back as a whole, as a unit. And then finally, of course, I had to throw in some Sun Ra, okay? So this one that we're listening to is a little bit more difficult than this one. I picked this one after going through kind of a couple, because this one, I think, is tuneful without being so tuneful that, like, it just becomes sort of a hum-along thing, like you hear on some of Sun Ra's records, especially his earlier ones, and I love that shit, by the way, don't get the wrong idea. It's very heavy on the drums. There are a lot of parts in this sort of like this. Well, that's not drums, but where you'll have something sort of pulsing underneath, whether it's drums or other horns, and someone soloing on top of that. Yeah, and actually it has a really early version of Love in Outer Space on it, which is one of my all-time favorite tunes by this guy, although not this version. But this is just such a great record, and even though Sun Ra is kind of crazy and has this reputation for being so far out, I think what you want to do is sit down and listen to jazz. I'm starting to feel like I'm repeating myself, but start listening to the parts. At this one, even though again it's a larger group with piano, flutes, bass, clarinet, guitar, bass, drums, flugelhorn. There's a space voice on one of these, which is like some guy like talking like through like some kind of horn like backwards or something like that. It's kind of crazy, right? But this is just another record where you can start to listen to it and start to get a feel for what this stuff is about. And again, once you start to get into this stuff, hopefully it'll become easier with time. You can branch out from these guys, start looking at other records by them, start looking at records that their sidemen made. I mean, the Andrew Hill one, all his sidemen made great records in their own right. And I think this provides a better starting point than just saying, okay, if I'm going to know about jazz, I got to learn about Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington, and because that's just too big a fucking nut to crack. What you need to do is find a few records you like and use those as your starting point, get your foothold there, and then just branch out from there. I mean, that's my advice, and I'm relatively new to jazz still. I've only been listening to it for about 10 years, and but I have all this to show for it because I love it that much. That's how I started. Read the histories by all means, but that's my advice, and hopefully you'll dig these records. At least listen to them on YouTube. Yeah, and that's all I've got to say. So thanks for watching, and I hope that helps, and hope you hear something you like.